So, so the beginning of the parsha. So we entitled this year "Confronting Complexities," and I think that there's a point here in terms of and this is a point we've made in the past, and it's probably obvious to anyone who begins to learn Parshas Toldos that it's probably the most complex parsha in the Torah. Right, Toldos is probably the hardest parsha in the Torah to understand for multiple reasons, right from the beginning to the end. You know, it is a very complicated parsha from many different perspectives. But I think I'd like to approach this and with initially from the very beginning of the parsha, because I think the very first pasuk sets the tone for the complexities that follow. Yeah. So the first pasuk, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham Elidus Yitzchak. So we know Rashi says as follows: Avraham Elidus Yitzchak, right? Leitzoni Hadar, says Rashi. What does it mean, Avraham Elidus Yitzchak? What does it mean that Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak? Clearly, we're talking about Toldos of Yitzchak. Yitzchak's children, Yitzchak's generations. Why on earth do we mention Avraham? This is the obvious and famous question. The second pshat of Rashi is as follows: he says that because we've said Yitzchak ben Avraham, Yitzchak is the son of Avraham, therefore we have to say Avraham Elidus Yitzchak. Why? Because because those who are scoffers, the scoffers of the generation, the Leitzonim, said, Avimelech and Sabra Sarah, hold on a second, there's something fishy going on. Sarah's waited so long for a child. All of a sudden she has Yitzchak. She's just been with Avimelech. He must be the father. That's what they said. And therefore, Master Kodesh Baruch Hu says Rashi, so Hashem forms the facial features of Yitzchak to be similar to Avram. So everyone would testify that Avram was the father of Yitzchak. And that's why it says Yitzchak ben Avraham, because there's testing. You can see clearly that Avram was the father of Yitzchak. Now, what's interesting here is as follows. Kerem Hatzvi asked the following question. He says, these people who are making this accusation, they're not just Leitzonim. You know, you see, late, okay, it's not the end of the world. You know, scoffs, makes fun, mockery. What do you mean they're Rishoim? They're wicked, right? You know, they're accusing, Sarah was Avimelech and not Avram, and it's adulterous, and that's, this is not, why are you saying, why are they just called Leitzonim? Why are they just called scoffers? And in fact, the question becomes more significant when you look at the sources for Rashi. Because the sources for the quote of Rashi, this is found both in a Gemara in Bava Metzia, this idea, and also in a Medrash. And in both places, it doesn't say the word Leitzonim. So I think the Gemara in Bava Metzia talks about, I think it maybe there even says Rishoim, it says the wicked ones, and then I think the Medrash says something else, but it doesn't say that word Leitzonim. So the Kerem Hatzvi says the following idea. He says like this. He says, what was going on here? We know that we know this if you look at you learn this through in Parshas Vayera. The Chazal say that Avraham davens for Avimelech because Ki Yatzar Atzar Hashem Ba'ad Kol Rech, and one of the punishment that Avimelech received for taking Sarah was that all their orifices were stopped up. They weren't able to give birth and everything else as well. And Avraham davened that they should once again be healed, and that takes place. And then as a result of davening for Avimelech, what happens? Next, Vashem Pokad Sarah. It's interesting in Vayera, even though it's a very, very long parsha, the first beginning part of Vashem Pokad Sarah we lane together with that whole episode of Avimelech. You ever noticed that? People don't realize often that the way the parshas are divided up in the Torah is incredibly precise. Logically, you'd expect the pause to be before Vashem Pokad Sarah. That's what we start laning on Rosh Hashanah. Why is it that when we lane in Parshas Vayera, those first few pesukim are actually in the same aliyah as the parsha before Avimelech? Because it goes together. It's the source of the idea that if you daven, you need something, and you daven for someone else, you're answered first. So Avram Avinu davens for Avimelech, and as a result, they should be able to give birth, and as a result, he's himself is blessed with a child, and Hashem remembers Sarah, and Sarah gives birth. Now, what did the Leitzonim say? All the Leitzonim said, these scoffers said, was through Avimelech Yitzchak was born. That's all they said. That's what the Kerem says. Through Avimelech, Sarah was born. Now that was true, right? That was true. Through Avimelech, Sarah was born, right? Yitzchak, sorry. Through Yitzchak, Yitzchak, right, sorry. Through Avimelech, Yitzchak, Through Avimelech, Yitzchak was born, right? It could be understood two ways. It can be understood in the sense of adulterous, or it can be understood that as a result of the episode of Avimelech and Avraham davening for Avimelech, he merited a child, Yitzchak. And that, he says, is why Rashi calls it late sonus. That's why Rashi calls it mockery and scoffing, because it's the most dangerous thing. It's someone who is clever, right? And effectively puts themselves in a situation where they can make out a statement which seems innocuous. I'm not doing anything. I'm just making a bit of fun, okay, understand this however you want. That type of statement, right? The Ponim Yofa says the word late stands for Lamdan and Tzaddik, right? Lamed is Lamdan, is a Lamdan, he knows how to learn, and the Tzaddik, he's a Tzaddik, right? That's how it makes out. Why? Because he's clever, looks down on others, and ridicules others. And that's why Rashi puts in here, that's what Kerem Tzvi suggests, that the emphasis here is on they were Leitzonim. It's much more dangerous, in a sense, than Rishoim. It's people who make comments and statements which can be understood in different ways, which are complex, but they can cause tremendous harm. And the reason why I think that's significant to the Parsha is because the whole Parsha, as we said, is complex. It's an introduction to the Parsha because it shows us how we have to understand that there are issues in life, there are dilemmas that are complex, that are not simple. And the whole of Parsha's Toldos is like that, beginning with those very first few words, Avraham holid es Yitzchak. The Hamek Dova says that what does it mean? He gives another explanation, Eila Toldos Yitzchak. Eila Toldos Yitzchak means Halichos Yimei Chayov. It means the way Yitzchak led his life. And therefore, says the Hamek Dova, why does it say Avraham holid es Yitzchak? The Netziv says that included in the notion of how he led his life was the fact that you could tell through every aspect of how Yitzchak lived that his father was an Avraham. That's how he conducted himself, right? And so that answers the question. It's a different way of answering it. Yeah, these are the generations of Yitzchak. Well, you should talk about Yaakov and Esav. No, Toldos means the way his life unfolded, and the way his life unfolded was in such a way that you could tell that he was Avraham Avinu's son. Unlike Yishmael, who although was the son of Avraham Avinu, but you couldn't tell that from the way he behaved. This is again something which takes a lifetime to develop. It takes a lifetime to understand. That's what the Parsha is setting out at the beginning. It's not complex. It is not straightforward. And then we move to the next complex subject in the Parsha, and that is, of course, the birth of the twins of Yaakov and Esav. And Rav Hirsch points out something which, if you haven't noticed, then it will really, some of these things that sort of hits you in the face. As so often with the Parshas and Bereshis, it's the things, we're so familiar with them that actually when you notice something that's out of the ordinary, you think, wow, I can't believe I never noticed that before. She is told, Vayoma Hashem lo, Shnei Goyim bevitnech, right? You're going to have twins. They are two nations. They're going to be different in many, many ways. They're going to go in different ways. The old one is going to serve the young one. Look at the next pasuk, Chof Daled. Vayimleu yomeha lo ledes, right? Vayimleu yomeha lo ledes, and her days were complete to give birth. V'hinei soimim bevitna, and behold, soimim bevitna, there are twins in her womb. What do you mean, behold? What do you mean? We know that, right? She suddenly gives birth. Oh, right, now we know the twins. We know there were twins. She was told prophetically that she was going to have twins. What's v'hinei? And behold, soimim bevitna, there are twins in her womb. Simple, basic question. Read the psukim. What on earth is that doing? The word hinei. We know this. We know this is happening. Okay. Says Rav Hirsch, he suggests a front, which is a very, very big chiddush. He says there's as follows. He says these twins were identical. Yaakov and Esav, identical. Now that's quite a remarkable thing when you think of the way we describe the differences in the way they looked and their appearances and everything else. Says Rav Hirsch like this: everyone expected non-identical twins because they heard how different they were in personality, but in fact they were identical. They were genetically identical, right? It's just that Esav was more developed than Yaakov was, right? Esav's more hair can often happen with twins, even if they are identical, right? He was further developed and formed as a human being in the womb. That is what he is Aderes Seyar, he is full of hair, whereas Yaakov wasn't. But they were genetically identical. They were genetically identical, okay? The difference was in their constitution. One was stronger and healthier, and the other one wasn't. Says Rav Hirsch, that's why it is spelt, he suggests, that's why it's spelt Tomim, as opposed to Tu'umim. Tomim means they were the same. They were like together. They were the same. They were identical in that way. So why is that significant? So Rav Hirsch says like this: everyone's surprised. They had been told, everyone knew that Rivka was going to have two boys, and these boys were going to be fundamentally different in every way. But the problem was, what should have happened was that the external similarity, when contrasted with that revelation about how different their lives were going to be, the pathways of their lives were going to be, should have drawn attention to the parents, to educators, right? It should have made people realize, this is all Rav Hirsch, that the differences were subtle below the surface. The fact that surprisingly they were identical, even though they were going to be so different, should have been a message for those who are bringing them up, including their parents, to understand that actually these two are very different, that they should study very carefully the differences in their qualities, in their natures, and effectively make sure that they weren't treated in the same way, that they were guided in different directions. That was the idea of them being externally, as I say, the fact that they were identical, yet at the same time, knowing that they were supposed to be so different. That contrast should have led people to a realization that actually this is more subtle here. It's not just they're going to look very different, but there's something beneath the surface that you have to uncover and work through. And then, of course, you get to the key phrase, Vayigdulu hana'orim. Vayigdulu hana'orim, Pasuk of Zayin, Rashi says, Vayigdulu hana'orim, Vayihi Esav, says Rashi, calls man shoyu ketanim, lo inikarim b'masayim. When they were children, no one recognized their differences. No one thought about, their nature, how different they were. When they became 13, one went in one direction to idolatry, and one went in the direction of the Beis HaMedrash. What's Rashi highlighting here? Rashi's highlighting, and again, this is how Rav Hirsch understands it, that mistakes were made. Mistakes were made in their upbringing. The very fact that no one realized until they were 13, almost as if it was too late then to try and do something. And obviously, it's only according to our understanding. We're talking about Yitzchak and Rivka. We have to express it in these terms. It's how Rav Hirsch does, because we need to understand the message of the Torah, the message it has for chinuch. That's the critical point Rav Hirsch is trying to convey, something which is at the heart of so much of his perush on the Torah and more. Is that as long as they were small, people didn't think about the differences. It's okay, we'll throw them together in the same class. It's fine. Chanuch lanar al pi darko. It wasn't applied as it could have been, when absolutely, really, in these situations, it was absolutely essential. We're dealing with children with different personalities. And the reason why this is highlighted here is specifically because it's a lesson for everyone. It's a lesson for us. We have to notice those differences, particularly in children, even from a very young age. Those differences matter. There are qualities, there are strengths, there are weaknesses, there are distinct personalities. We may have we are one people. We are part of one Jewish mission in life, but our pathways are different. They're diverse, just like our human character traits are diverse. And that is something which should have been picked up on. That's understanding why we understand why Yaakov, of all people, when he gives the brachas to the Shvatim at the end of his life, what does the Torah say? Ish asher kavir chosoi berachosam. He blessed them according to their brachas, what they needed. He knew what each of his children, he looked at what each of his children needed, and they received the brachas that they require. That was the idea, the strengths and weaknesses of each one. That's why Al-Pi Darko is so critical. Rav Hirsch basically says that we try and bring up a Yaakov and Esav in the same classroom, with the same routines, the same mannerisms, the same for everything else. That can lead to the ruin of one of them. Why? Because Yaakov could flourish in his learning, in his studying, whereas Esav was essentially Ish Yodei Atzayit. He'll long for the day when he can throw away all of the books, when he can go out into the field, because that's what he wants. That's his nature. That's what he really wants to be. But had it been channeled in the right way, then the Ish Yodei Atzayit could have been a Gibar Lifnei Hashem. He was mighty, he was strong, but he could have been used it and channeled it in the right way. He could have become someone who would have complemented Yaakov Avinu. This is, of course, something which is, for many reasons, is a remarkable way to approach it. But it actually matches with many other aspects of the parsha. You can actually follow this through. We don't have time to see them. You can actually follow this through as well with the different brachos that are given. There are brachos that are, you look at them carefully, the brachos that Yaakov gives, Yitzchak gives, you can see that there are some that are meant for Esau, some meant for Yaakov. This whole idea that actually in the ideal world, the two would have complemented each other. But a person really wants to bring up this idea so fundamental to chinuch, and the idea that there are complexities, there are details, and to be sensitive to those differences is so vital. So now we come to the Perek Chof Zayin Posuk Lamed Daled. I want to share with you some ideas of the Michtav Meliyahu. The Michtav Meliyahu, Rav Dessler, in the first chelik of Michtav Meliyahu, he has a very, very fundamental piece on defining emes and sheker. What is truth and falsehood? What does it actually mean? And of course, he bases that whole piece around this parsha, because of all parshas where you need to talk about that is this parsha. So you look at Chof Zayin Lamed Daled. You have that. You have the shock, right? That is the posuk. I always remember when laning this, it is such a dramatic posuk to lane, because it's got so many notes which are designed, the tamim are designed to shock you. In the same posuk, you've got a zarka and two pazers, right? Which is highly unusual. Vayecharad Yitzchak charado gedola ad ma'od vayomer. That's a pazer. Mi'efo, it's another pazer, right? One after the other. Yeah. So it's the notes are very emphatic. Who at side? Who is the one? He suddenly realized when Esau comes in, who is the one who brought this food to me? And he says he will be the one who brought me will be blessed. The Medrash says like this. It's a Yalkut Shimoni, I think, and it provides a very different perspective on what Yitzchak's fear was. He says like this. The Medrash says when Yaakov left and Esav comes in, Yitzchak trembles. The walls of the house began to shake, and he says, "Mi efoi, mi hu zeh she'osid le'afos kan, ani o Yaakov." Who is the one who is going to be called to task for what has transpired? Is it me, or is it Yaakov? Why is he worried? Because he saw there was some deception had happened, clearly, right? That was clear because of the fact that Esau has just walked in and says, I'm your son, right? Something has happened. And he asks, who is guilty? Is it Yaakov who's guilty because he was the one who carried out the deception? Or is it me because I let myself be led astray? I had suspicions. What is one of the surprising things about the whole piece is the fact that Yitzchak says, Hakol Kol Yaakov, right? He knows something is funny and he lets it continue. He lets it go on. Hakol Kol Yaakov, the voice of Yaakov, and yet he continues. So he's trembling as to whether or not is it me or is it Yaakov? Who is the one who is guilty here? Omalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash carries on. Hashem said to him, Lo Yatov Lo Yaakov. It's not you and it's not Yaakov either. Elahu Hatzod Sayed. It's the one who went hunting. Loi atem hashakronim. You are not the falsehood here. You are not the liars here. Ki bein shneichem echzartem adover la'amitoi k'moshe roilios. Because the way things have transpired between the two of you somehow, it's how it was meant to be. Rak Esav, hatzayed b'fiv, the one who has hunting in his mouth, the one who hunts others through deception through his tongue. He is the one who caused a deception, which has now been removed through you. He's the one who will be punished. That's the Medrash says. That Hashem is reassuring Yitzchak and saying that ultimately he was the great deceiver. And this has transpired min hashomayim because it had to be this way. He had to be exposed in that way. Rav Dessler uses this medrash to explain that ultimately what emes, what truth is what brings us to what Hashem wants to be, the ultimate truth in this world. The ultimate truth in this world. And he says that that if you look at the way Chazal describe Esav, and this is in a number of different places, he's someone who, as we know, he attempts to put on the face of a tzaddik in many different areas. He puts on the face of a tzaddik. He is the one who famously asks complicated shilas to his father. Oh, what do we do? Do we take Maisa from this? We know what how Chazal put it. In many and in other areas as well. And the paradox here is that the Medrash frames Esav as the Ramai, the one who deceives, in the one place where he doesn't deceive, right? That's the paradox of the whole parsha, right? Esav is the one who's carrying on a deception the whole time, and he's the one who's going hunting, and he's the one who's killing, and he's the one who's going off with taking other women, and then he marries someone at the age of 40 to show, I'll be like my father, now I'm going to be kosher, right? Now I'm going to do the right thing. Everything in public, he looks correct. But the one episode where he is actually simply following through what he was told to do, that's all he's doing. He went and provided the food that he was asked to do, and that one time is the one time when he's not being a Ramai, he's not deceiving. And yet here, when he does what he's told, we say that no, you're the one who's the deceiver. So the Rav Dessler says like this: the whole purpose, the fundamental idea of this whole parsha is Hashem teaching us what is truth and what is falsehood. Yaakov also arma. Yaakov acted in a way which was deceptive. Aval also bal korcha. He did it against his will. He was terribly upset that it had to be done, but it was clear that it was essential. There was nothing else to do. There was no other way. You see the words, and you see that from the parsha itself. So Rav Hirsch emphasizes, for example, that the word imoy is used many times in the parsha, right? When he begins the preparations, right? As his mother said, his mother. Why his mother? Because he was saying, because he did it because his mother told him to do it, and he uses the word ulai yumusheni avi. Ulai, perhaps my father will feel me and will say the difference. Now there's a difference in the Torah between ulai and pen. Yeah, yes, it's a fantastic, fascinating thing. Ulai means perhaps, pen also means lest. What's the difference? So pen is, I don't want it to happen, lest it happen, yeah? Ulai is, actually, I quite like it to happen. So the problem is, that works throughout the whole Torah. I think it's the, I don't remember who it is, but it's traced through the, it's traced through the Torah. You can, whenever it says ulai, it's actually, I really would like it to happen. The famous example is last week's Parsha. What does Eliezer say, right? Maybe she won't want to come with you. Why? Because really, Eliezer wants to marry, wants to marry his own daughter, right? Or lie, perhaps, maybe it will be. So why here does Yaakov say, that's the last thing he wants, to be caught out in the deception? No, on the contrary, he wants to be caught out in the deception. That's what the Würzburger Rov suggests, that he actually wanted to be caught out in the deception. This is something which he deeply doesn't want to happen, but he knows it has to. He knows it has to be. He knows it has to be. So he says, "V'shekel l'shem emes kozehu hu emes." Falsehood for where it's for the ultimate truth. That itself is truth. Esav, he says, Esav is the one who represents those who are charlatans and those who look correct on the surface but are false underneath. Esav. He goes through the different examples that we've mentioned of how Esav is the one who puts on a good show. He looks like he's from on the outside, but inside he's not. He is the one who introduces the idea that you can do anything you want, and to be with this, ish nichbad, an honorable person. Scandal, uses those words. Samach kuf aleph nun dalet aleph lamed. No scandal has happened to him, because he manages to carry it off, because in public it all looks fine. Ha gentleman, uses that word as well. Gentleman, gimel with the dash. He says, ha gentleman hazehu kuloi sheker. He says this person is completely false. Everything he's doing is just a vessel to, if you like, sanctify the false life that he's leading. When Hashem doesn't delay for the deceivers, he's revealed in front of his father that he is in fact ultimately someone who deceives, until his father recognizes this so suddenly that he adds the words Gam Baruch Yeh, that he will be blessed, that Yaakov will be blessed. So what Rav Dessler does here so powerfully is he highlights the inherent paradox that lies at the heart of this whole parsha, that whole second half of Parsha's Toldos, which is Esau is held up as the one who is the Ramai, the deceiver. He's the one who deceives his father the whole time, but he's caught out in the one episode where he's not. He's actually doing what his father wants him to do. But it's specifically through that the Torah teaches us that ultimately one has to be tocho kabara, the inside has to be the same as the outside, and that the epitome of falsehood, of real falsehood, is someone who's professing to be something on the outside that isn't reflected on the inside. True emes is represented by Yaakov Avinu, where he does something because it's the right thing to do, because it's emes, even though it's immensely difficult for him to do so. I don't want to be here, I don't want to do it. But he has to do it, he has to carry it through. Those are the complexities of Parsha's Toldos. We began with the Leitzone Hadar, the scoffers of the generation, the subtleties that's in mockery that isn't the same as Rishaim. It's more complicated than that, but it can cause so much more damage. Going forward into the experience of the birth of the twins, the fact that there should have been a realization that the differences between them were not just external. On the contrary, they were internal. They were way they could have been picked up through the process of chinuch of those children. And then finally, Yitzchak's dilemma itself. Yitzchak's fear. Maybe it's me, maybe it's Yaakov, and Hashem says no. The whole purpose is to point out the real Ramai, to point out that Esav's path is the one that is wrong. And that is, I think, enough for today. Wish you all a good Shabbos. Those who are staying, we're going to be going on in a few minutes. We're going to leave the Zoom link open for the next part of the